Hi, Sue Cantor here. I work with Bridgeview Rehab Specialties Medical Therapeutic Yoga Program, and I wanted to hop on today to talk to you a little bit about the shoulder pain, and how we can use yoga as a form of managing shoulder pain. I wanted to start by saying that the information I give you today does not replace medical information from your doctor or physical therapist. Everyone has an individualized story as to why they have shoulder pain, and so it's always a good idea if you're continuing to struggle to check with your physician or get a good evaluation by a physical therapist so they can put you on a more individualized path. What I'm going to talk to you today about are some general recommendations. So there are several reasons why you can have shoulder pain, but we know that about 70 to 85% of the time shoulder pain is related to the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is a set of 4 muscles and their tendons that kind of envelope the shoulder joint, and the rotator cuff helps to impart stability to the shoulder. We also know that exercise is one of the best ways to manage rotator cuff problems. We know that 70 to 90% of people in the 40 to 70 age range have abnormalities in the rotator cuff and actually have no pain at all. So the amount of rotator cuff involvement is not related to the degree of pain, and as I said, we do know exercise works really well to manage rotator cuff problems. We also know that no specific exercises are better than another. So lots of different kinds of exercise work, but they do have to involve the shoulder and the shoulder blade. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can use some props in yoga to help the rotator cuff do its job better. So I'm going to go over a few poses and how we can add these props, especially if you're having some trouble with bringing the arms overhead or into certain positions during yoga. So the first thing that I wanted to bring up was using a resistance band around the back and at the shoulder blade level. And what we're doing here is we're providing some assistance by giving the shoulder blade a little bit more stability. The other concept that I want to use here is the idea of a short to long lever, because oftentimes in order to get the arm overhead, instead of just trying to take a long straight arm overhead, if we go from a short to long lever, it's a little bit easier. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up about how we can sometimes get the rotator cuff to do its job better is by using a fist. Can often also engage the rotator cuff. So with those principles in mind, we're using the band around the shoulder blade, making a fist, and moving our arm in a short to long lever overhead position. Now we can add to this, and this can be part of our warrior one, for instance, as we bring our arms overhead. And we can add to this stepping back or stepping forward. So another principle around getting the rotator cuff to do its job is using what we call our whole kinetic chain, so our whole body. There's some research that suggests that as we use our lower extremities in addition to moving the arms, we're actually again facilitating more work at the rotator cuff. So again, this is where yoga works really nicely. We're already doing this. We're stepping forward, we're stepping back as we take our arms overhead. So again, just a band behind the back can be a nice way to help the shoulder blade be in a better position and allow the shoulder to go overhead with more ease. Another pose that I wanted to go over was using a loop band. And I think what we'll do is first start out with lying on our back and doing some arm flows. So again, as I mentioned, because we're trying to get the rotator cuff to do its job better, using a loop band like this, where we start to take our arms apart, is a really nice way to start to make that rotator cuff work a little bit harder. And you can use different levels of bands as a way to sort of scale this up and down depending on your strength or the irritability of your shoulder. So I'm going to lay down. And again, we're going to take the same principle of short to long lever as we go overhead. Again, this is a pretty good amount of work, especially when we want to keep the tension on the band the entire time. But since we do a lot of arm floats in different positions, this would be another prop that can help us get that rotator cuff to work better at the right time. So here's another example of some adds that we can use in yoga. In that same vein, getting into a hands and knees position is also good activity for the shoulder. It creates some stability at the shoulder without overloading the rotator cuff. And again, we can use this wide band around our forearms to get the rotator cuff to work. And if we're really struggling to get the arm overhead, just getting our body back so that our arm is in that overhead position is a good way to really start, especially if the shoulder's really irritable. So another way to, in hands and knees, add this prop to get our rotator cuff working a little bit better. Okay, another prop or another movement or activity of yoga that I like to use is thread the needle, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But by adding some resistance to this movement, again, we're potentially facilitating some better movement at the shoulder for a couple of reasons. One, again, the weight-bearing arm, the one that's not moving, we're creating some stability at the shoulder. And then the arm that is moving, not only are we adding some work at the shoulder blade, but we're also adding some rotation of the thoracic or the middle spine and the neck or the cervical spine. Research again tells us that if you have a stiff thoracic spine or a stiff neck or cervical spine, that can influence your shoulder not moving as well. So again, adding a resistance band of whatever level works for you and adding some thoracic and cervical rotation can also help facilitate better movement of the shoulder. That is another movement of yoga where I like to add a prop to help with the shoulder. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is balance, since balance is another, I think, added benefit of doing yoga, gaining balance or working on balance. And we actually know that the pain circuits and our balance control circuits have some common pathways. And so there's again some research that talks about when we have shoulder pain, our balance can actually be thrown off, which is interesting. So again, working on balance while we are doing yoga and moving our arm can again facilitate reduction in pain and better movement at the shoulder. So things like, again, doing some single leg balance work while we're moving the arms, or again, as we're stepping and working on balance and moving the arms, again, can be a way to facilitate shoulder movement. So again, in our tree pose where we're focusing on trying to balance on one leg and perhaps trying to move the arm at the same time, again, so that we're working on those same pathways or circuits that tend to work together. So those are a couple of points that I wanted to bring up about the shoulder, managing shoulder pain, especially if you're having trouble getting the arm away from the body or overhead, and how we can use a lot of yoga exercises and poses to help manage this. Reach out with any questions, and thanks for listening.